There was a man in Judah who knew it. And it says that he started rallying people. The first thing he did was he assembled all the Levites from all over the fortified cities of Judah. He gathered them and started to bring them back to Jerusalem. Then he went to the centurions who were in charge of 100 people. And he said, come gather around in Jerusalem. And you knew what had to be his plan. So the Lord brought them together, and now there was a rally. He accepted. You might never see anyone with purpose in the world, but underneath it was happening. Jehoiada was the man the Lord used. So he had the Levites together. He had the heads of the tribes of the family. They all gathered in Jerusalem. Then he gave instructions to the priests. This is what you are to do. A third of you go watch the doors over there. A third of you go to the first gate. A third of you go to the foundation gate. No one's to enter the temple of the Lord. If they do, they must be slain. So we started gathering again. 14 things. It says he's the one who instigated. It doesn't take, you don't look for revival to come to the church or to the body. It's always a man who's coming up and believing what God says. Display it in person. And some of you are here might be crying because you know on the job. Everything is against the promise of God. And he said, I will use you. You should be a light in this world. And if anything, you're getting back with people are backbiting you, putting you down, making fun of you. One day that light goes on. But you will be guaranteed that God puts a light in your temple. He will always surrounded by a person. He will always be surrounded by darkness. Because then it's more glory when the light comes on. So don't be surprised if the fiery trial is around. The light wasn't surprised. And it was no the word of God. The word of the Lord was in him, smiling like a baby. And he held it for 6 years, and then he said, I can stand it no more. Like Jeremiah, he said, the wrath of the Lord is upon me. And he said, like Micah, that I am filled with wisdom, spirit of power and understanding, that I might declare the day of his transgression. So we see Jehovah coming out of nowhere, signing the priest. Then it says, he equipped them. He went in the temple, and he got David's spears and his chief shields, and he kept them. Threw them to the centurions and captains. And then at the same, no one but the priest entered the temple from now on. No more of Baali's men, no more of a priest, no one but the priest as the Lord prescribed. You can just see this man. Let it feel as though for years it was a song in the dark, and all of a sudden this man is going to see the word of God working in him. Then it says he protected. All of you surround the king. So they were left in your hand. The little boy was only 7 years old. This little, they could easily overthrow him in the military coup by Italy. And all the men were there surrounded with priests with swords in their hands. Let your imagination go. God gave you imagination to that. Right? Then it says he coronated him. Crowned him king of Israel. And he decided that the first thing Jehoiada did, he handed him the covenant, the law of the Lord. He put it in his hand, and you will be ruling by the law of the Lord, not by Baal. He hands it to him, and all of a sudden, he is in my life. And all the people start yelling, praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! You are the only ones who are allowing there as the Lord prescribed. No more lay people, no more priests of Baal. It's you. Then it says, he consecrates himself. And it says, he consecrates himself and the king and the people of the Lord. They can prostitute themselves with idols. Not anymore. He goes, between me and King Josh and the people, Lord, and make a covenant with you. We will be your people, and you will be our God. Baal rules no more. Some of you young people, some of you have given yourselves to a failure. Because you've been put down, you've been oppressed in the high school, your life has been snuffed out by peer pressure. You've succumbed to that. under Athaliah's lies, your tyranny, and get yourself under the tutor of Jehoiada, the Holy Spirit. Amen? You hear me now? Because if anybody's on the front lines, it's you people. The wicked one knows that he gets the young, he's got the generation. Then it says, he reinstates Joash, king of the Israel. Puts Joash, brings him back to the temple. All the people are cheering and yelling, going to the king, and put him back in his rightful place. All the Baal would time. Revive us. And it was for one man who could contain it no longer. Part 3. The title of this message, by the way, is The Return of the Levite. You've heard of Return of the Jedi, I'm sure, and I couldn't help studying this text as it came to my thought. And there are a lot of parallels in it as well, because the Levites had been suppressed, and they were not allowed to minister in the calling God had prescribed for them, to be priests unto him. And here one man brings them back. It was the return of the Levites back to the temple where they belong. Hallelujah. Now, some comments on Jehoiada. You notice that revival and restoration of the way God prescribed things happened through one man believing the promise of the Lord. May you also notice that there was nothing in the environment or situations or circumstances surrounding him that was conducive to what the Lord had said. Man, if the Lord promised somebody to come on the kingly throne of David through David's line, I don't see it. Have you ever been in a situation where you know the Father has spoken to you, he has promised you something, and yet everything else says, no way? I think God delights in doing it that way. Where's faith involved? It's all going the way you expect it to go, but he's promised you. And notice one other thing. I do not like God being God for the 11th hour. But here it was again. Because all it had to do was get Joash slain, and his covenant was broken. His word, he was a liar, because he promised that somebody through Joash's line, David's line, would be the eternal king. And if Joash dead, unless God created somebody, the promise was broken. So you see a little infant, maybe less than a year old, hiding in a temple, fearing for his life. If he's gone, it's over. Been there? When it led the last little hope of what God has promised is there. Key verses in the chapter. May they say this too, that God always gets his man. Like Dudley Do-Right, the Canadian Mountains. Doesn't he? God always gets his man. And you know something about God? If he doesn't get his man, he'll make one. He'll make his man. You think Gideon was God's man? He made him God's man. In chapter 23 alone, there are at least 16 references to Jehoiada. All those little gold spots that you can see are his name, reference to what he did. Key verses. In verse 3, the king's son shall reign as the Lord promised. He didn't look at what the situation was. He said, the Lord promised. And he is God. No comments. Key verse. Jehoiada and his sons, they got the king and they presented him with a copy of the covenant. Jehoiada was a man who will save yourself much tribulation, much hassle, much depression if you were a man and a woman of the word. And it's time we stop using the imagination for the perversion of the devil and let our imagination fly when we read these things. There's more material in here for soap operas than Dynasty or Dallas or Knots Landing could ever produce. And the producers of those shows, if they had any insight or wisdom, they'd come here. It gets a lot messier. Within a marital relationship, incest, killing, it's all in here. We don't have to run to the television. At least this one, after they show that, they have moral prescriptions for it. Television does not. It's a shame that this thing most of the time lays there an untapped resource. I'll never forget what Dan Betzer said at the Children's Pastor Conference up in February. He said, how is it that we can take a book that is so full of life and excitement and make it so boring? God help us. They gave him a copy of the covenant. And And then there's another information here that the priests are to reign in the temple as the Lord prescribed. And then it says, when you restore the temple, that was in verse 11, verse 6, verse 3, and then in verse 18, when you assign the oversight of the Levites to the temple, it goes, to present the burnt offerings to the Lord, as written in the law of Moses, with singing and rejoicing. And there it is again, the law of Moses. Notice that he has something to prescribe. He doesn't just do what he feels like doing, or what looks good to him, what works. It's always he has something that's higher than him. We go by the authority of the word of the Lord. Then he goes, with rejoicing and singing, as David had ordered in the Psalms. There it is again. Now, I wish the story ended there. We turn the page, at least in this Bible. Chapter 24. One of the first things, the first words that has been recorded after Jehoiada went through all of that and risked his life to get the king back in his reign, the first thing that King Joash says to him is, why haven't you? And I was laying in bed last night looking at this young man. What's the matter with you? It just made me sick to my stomach. All that Jehoiada did the previous chapter, and the first recorded words of the king to him are, why haven't you? You spoiled little brat. You know, you just want to give him the back of your hand. That's what happens when immaturity gets in leadership. Okay? Look what happens. He starts complaining about the temple, the shape it's in. Well, what did you expect with Athaliah running the town, the country? All right? And after a while, it says that he did restore the temple. But interesting point here in verse 3 of chapter 24 is that one of the first things Jehoiada did after he was back in office, Joash was, he chose 2 wives for him. And I couldn't help but wonder to myself, I wouldn't be surprised if Jehoiada said, I'm not going through that again. And he made sure he got married and had lots of sons to keep the line going as the Lord had promised. And now I'm going to skip a large portion of this about getting into the restore the temple to get down to verse 15. Jehoiada was old and full of years, and he died at the age of 130. He was buried with the kings in the city of David. He was not a king, but look at the honor they give him. He was a king, wasn't he? He didn't have the blood or the title of a king, but let's face it, really what you are is what you do. He was a king. Because of the good he had done in Israel for God and for his temple. And here's the key. After the death of Jehoiada, well, before I do that, let me look back here. In verse 24, chapter 24, verse 2, it says, Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. Don't forget that. Then back down here in verse 15. Verse 14, as long as Jehoiada lived, burnt offerings were presented continually in the temple. Those are very key verses you must remember. Now let's on verse 17. After the death of Jehoiada, it says that officials came to Joash, and it says they paid him homage. You know what that means? They built his ego, flattered him, perhaps worshipped him, built his pride, and you think by now he would have learned a lesson. And because that was like a hook, it was like a fish hook. And on the fish hook was the bait. That was flattery, saying how great he was, sugary compliments, almost worship, veneration. But the hook was sin. And he bit it, hook, line, and sinker. Because it says after these people counseled him, here's what he said. Very next line after that. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. He thinks, you would think he'd learned the lesson. Remember King Herod? Acts chapter 12, he gave a great oration, and the people said, the voice of God and not a man. And because he did not give the glory to God, an angel of the Lord smote him, and worms ate him. King Nebuchadnezzar, haven't I caused the glory and the splendor of this kingdom? Isn't it by my doings? The words hadn't finished out of his mouth when the word came to him, you're going to live like an animal for 7 years, till you realize who it is who gives you the ability to do so. Darius, reigning king, Darius the Mede, when Daniel was in office. It says they made a law, and I'm sure the reason they got it passed is because one of the stipulations was that if you worship any god or man, or pray to any god or man, but the king, let him be thrown in the den of lions. Why do you think the king went for it? Because he wanted to be worshipped. What caused Satan's downfall? He wanted to be worshipped. Pride. And here it is, and Joash doesn't learn. The first thing he does, he abandons his God. And you know what's interesting? It says, you know who the Lord sends to talk to him? It's precious. It shows the love of Father. First of all, he sends his prophets to the people to bring them back to him. It wasn't to condemn. Don't ever think the prophet's primary reason is there to condemn. The prophets are to woo you back to him. I love the prophets because you see the heart of God revealed so vividly. So he sent his prophets, and yet they would not hearken. And then it says, the Lord sent Zechariah. Well, who was Zechariah? He was Jehoiada's son. They'll listen to Zechariah. After all Jehoiada did for Joash, they'll listen to him. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and said, this is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. You know what it says? They plotted against him. And by order of the king, they stoned him. Joash. I interject here that he didn't even remember not only the kindness of Jehoiada, but do you remember I said, who got him out of the temple or got him out of the palace when Athaliah was killing everybody? Jehoiada's wife. So he had a great debt, and look what he does. As a result, they killed Jehoiada's son Zechariah, and it says in the scripture that he forgot all of the kindness that Jehoiada showed him. Must have been pretty mental. Now let's see the consequence. Because of this, the Lord aroused the hostility of his enemies. Ever since you had the hostility of your enemies aroused, when you aren't walking that close with them? Is it his license to do so? To make things rough for you if his name is jealous? And you're throwing yourself at every idol and fad and thing the world has to offer? I think because he's justified you freely by grace and done everything to win you, I think it's his prerogative. And if he wants to arouse a little hostility, your little one might start teething at night. Your wife might be bugging you for a $100 gift certificate for Sibley's. Things that drain you. But you know what it's meant to do? Like Hosea said, in their misery they'll seek me. If I can't get them to come to me out of love, they're going to come in misery. But by golly, they're coming to me. Father wants them. So he sent prophet after prophet after prophet. Sent Zechariah, they stoned him. It says that the Lord sent the Aramean army, and they killed all of the leaders of Judah. And then it says it took the plunder of Judah and the booty and the wealth, and it took it to Damascus, where their king was. And then it says Joash was severely wounded by the Arameans. The sad thing about the Arameans, and I wish I had time, I really do, this is frustrating. The Arameans were a much smaller army than Israel's army, and yet the Lord gave his own people into their hands. How many times previous kings had Judah been outnumbered? By millions! And the Lord would hand their enemies to his people. And all you got to do is trust me. I'll give you the strategy. I'll tell you where to go. I'll tell you where to hide and where to attack. Sometimes I might just have you sing, but they're yours. And the sad thing about the story is that the enemy, which was much smaller than Judah, they felled Judah. And then it says, while he was severely wounded in his bed, his own officials conspired against him and slew him in his bed. And notice the difference. Jehoiada, who was a priest, was buried in the tombs of the kings. Joash, who was the king, was not buried in the tombs of the kings. It's a sad story. Does it sound familiar? Remember what I said at the beginning when we studied the Old Testament? You do not go to the Old Testament unless you look for Jesus Christ. It says that Jehoiada instituted and instigated the revival in Israel. God so loved the world that God started something when he sent his Son. It says that Jehoiada assembled all the people. There has never been such unity in Israel as when Jesus came. Somebody was on the earth that started speaking with spirit and with life. And his words were not like the Pharisees and those with authority. There was authority with him. Because you know where it came from? His relationship. Don't ever let anybody tell you you confess yourself into authority. The only way you get authority with God and man is through relationship. Period. It will never change. Jehoiada also, like Jesus, Jehoiada equipped his people. Remember, he went in the temple, the holy place, and he got the spears and the shields that David put there. What did Jesus do? He gave you his armor, the armor of God. What else did Jehoiada do? Disciple gave him a covenant. Jesus became the bread of life to us. He's the teacher. He imparts understanding. You have no need that any man should teach you, because you have an unction from the Holy One who's within you. He is your teacher. So don't take what I have to say. Be a Berean Christian. Be a Berean Bethelite. You go back and check what I say today. Okay? What else did he do? He eradicated all of his enemies. Jehoiada did for Joash. Jesus, Colossians 2:14, he made a show of them openly. And he took Satan's weapon, which was the law of God, and used it against him. He fulfilled it, and then he paid the penalty which we incurred. And it goes on and on. I wish I had time. He delegates. We're his. And look what happens. After a while, Jesus spent all of his lifetime teaching, ministering, being patient with, changing people to be like him. And then he died. And you know, when you really think about it, he didn't see much fruit from everything he did. Have you ever noticed that? With his disciples, I mean. Now, there were a lot of people healed, but what do you think Jesus was really after? Changed men. You can always find miracles. And yet he saw this band of men after he died. They deserted him. And he even told them they would. Tonight, the shepherd shall be struck, and the sheep shall be scattered. Oh, no, not me, Lord. No, not me, Lord. Yeah, I understand Thomas will. He's always doubted. You will deny me 3 times. But I pray for you that when you were converted, you strengthen your brothers. He washed Judas's feet, and he gave him the same power and authority that he gave the other disciples. Judas was healing people, preaching the gospel. Jesus washed his feet, even though he knew he would betray him. I don't know if Jehoiada knew that Joash would go bad after he did. He must have noticed something, a moral deficiency in Joash. He must have seen something there. But Jesus knew too. Now, all of this parallels, I could go into a lot of detail. I could probably write a book with it, with Jesus and what happened here. But there's one major difference that brings us hope. When Jehoiada died, all he left were his teachings, the fruit of his labors, and really didn't have much left to offer. He left his son. Did that make a difference? God's people were a vineyard. And Jesus said that he sent prophet after prophet after prophet, messenger, servant, to the people who he gave care of the vineyard. And what did they do? They slew the first one, slew the second one, slew the third. I'll send my son. They'll honor him. They'll respect him. And Jesus said they sent the son, and they killed him also. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. He was despised and rejected of men. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid our faces from him. It was as though you're in high school, and somebody isn't in your clique, and they want to be part of you. And you turn your face and ignore him as you walk by. Or you have the group, don't act like he's not there. We hid our faces, as it were, from him, and we esteemed him not. But you know what? He had a guarantee on his investment because he said, my reward is with my God. I did my part. Hallelujah. And I know my reward is with my Father because he's going to give me children. And I have not labored in childbirth on the cross for nothing. I'm bearing seed, the seed of the church. My reward is with my God. And the brethren come forward for communion. He knew who the one was who gives him the fruit. It wasn't man. Beloved, if you're trusting in us, don't trust in us. If you're looking to the pastors as your Jehoiada, as your crutch, we will fail and fail miserably. We learned it the hard way, didn't we? Not long ago. Jesus knew it too. So what did he do? When he departed, like Jehoiada, Jehoiada really had nothing much to offer. But Jesus did. When I leave, I will not leave you alone. You know, I used to read that and think, yeah, that's great. I feel so comforted, Lord. I know you care for us. You know what else? He didn't trust us. It's good. He knew better. He's been dealing with men for thousands of years. Listen, I know, and he didn't say this. This is Michael Gurdon's paraphrase. Listen, I know what you're capable of doing without me. Because apart from me, you can do nothing. And I know if I go here, it's going to be bananas down here. What did the disciples do? Some say they went fishing, hiding, denying. I got somebody I'm going to leave with you. In fact, he is me. We think the same. We have the same power attributes, same character, holiness. There's really no difference except he's a person and I'm a person. And I'm going to leave him here for you. Praise the Lord. I will not leave you comfortless. He will abide in you always. So that we don't have to go the route that Joash did. Would you distribute them, brethren? Praise the Lord. You can distribute them. Thank you. If you were a person of Judah in that time, and you knew that promise of God, and you knew that somehow the Messiah King was coming from that line of men, would you be encouraged? One thing it does encourage us about is that we know that Jesus did not get his authority or his holiness from his ancestors, did he? Another confirmation of the virgin birth. And if you were a person in those days, as people can be with ministers these days, and you look to man, and your trust is in man, I would imagine that we'll be an awful lot like the Judeans of that time. Here's a new king now, Ahaziah. Perhaps he's the one the Lord promised about. What's he listening to Jezebel's counsel for? Why is he doing what Athaliah says? Doesn't he know she's a witch? Jehoram? Maybe it's Jehoram. Oh, what are you doing? You're supposed to be our king. You slay all your brothers. No compassion. You're not the one. And they looked 19 times, and no one came. They went into captivity, and no one came. But he has come now. There will never be an other king. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Jehoiada was a priest. Jehoiada was a king, even though he didn't have the title. And you can be sure Jehoiada was a prophet. He was a man of the word. Jesus, the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 7. Jesus, King of kings and Lord of lords, Revelation. Jesus, the prophet who should come into the world, Deuteronomy 18. Thank God. We're going to sing after we partake. I hope there's a new light on this hymn now, the first lines of it. King of my life, I crown thee now. Thine shall the glory be. Amen. The night he was betrayed, he took bread. He took it and he gave thanks for it. It's funny that he did, because he didn't have to give thanks. He deserved it. We don't even deserve to be fed by God, if you understand the Scriptures right. And yet we take so much for granted. When all you deserve is the wrath and condemnation of God, and the slightest little blessing on the other side of the fence, we should be falling on our faces for. Jesus gave thanks. And he broke it and he said, "This is my body which is given for you. And as often as you eat it, remember me." He had to die like Jehoiada. Jehoiada died a nice death. 130 years old, full years, good life, and he died of old age. Jesus died a violent death, that we might have peace with God. Amen. Brethren, one of the things that makes me love Jesus, I think it says in the Gospel of Mark that he knew what was going to happen to him. He said, "The prince of the power of darkness comes, but he has no part in me." Thank God. But he says, "Now this is your hour in the power of darkness." But you know what it says in Mark that he did before he knew he was going to be betrayed by his friends he loved? The same friends he said, "You are those who stood by me in my trials." You know what it says he did before he knew he was going to have his flesh ripped apart? And perhaps the greatest suffering he did was the sin of the world on someone who knew no sin, could not identify with sin. It was a new experience for him. And carrying the weight of the world. It says he sang a hymn. What kind of a man sings to his death? We have some growing up to do, don't we? We die death several times. During the day, don't get that candy we wanted. We fuss like the kids, don't we? I'm still a children's minister. Right? Right now. I'm a child, aren't we? And yet Jesus, on going to his death, he sang a hymn. How many of you ladies are worshiping when you're chained to your kitchen sink and you feel like you could be doing something with a higher calling? Jesus sang when he was dying to himself. Hallelujah. Let's partake together.